Tony White and Gus Malzahn press conferences are very impressive.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Florida State just completed their press conference for Gus Malzahn, Tony White, and to be honest, I was very impressed. I know Gus, but I didn't really know anything about Tony other than what I'd read and heard from a few anecdotes. And to be honest, while I knew one and the other I knew nothing, I came away learning a lot about both individuals, and I'm very happy to have this podcast. It is probably the most giddy that I have been about Florida State football and its future since somewhere during the 2023 season, before Jordan Travis went down or anything else. This is as good as I felt about Florida State in a very long time. So at the end of the show, I'm going to talk about some of the portal needs on the offensive side of the ball based on what Gus said. But first, I want to talk about Coach White. Then I'll talk about Coach Malzahn based on their conversations with the media at the press conference, and then we'll get into the other stuff. So let's start with Coach White. He's been at San Diego State. He's been at Syracuse, been at Arizona State, and he's been at Nebraska, among other places. He's a well-traveled coach. 3-3-5 defense. If you don't know what that means, you can look up a lot of different things online, but here's the basis of it. And to be honest, one of the things that I was really excited to hear, because that defense historically is not the friendliest to learn. I've denoted that on other podcasts here at Locked On Seminoles here recently in the last couple of days. But he made a statement that just made like the heavens opened, because I wish more coaches would take this approach. It is not your scheme. It is the players that matter. The old saying, it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. Lee Corso on ESPN's famous show in the mornings on Saturday talked about that a lot, but so do many other people. You need to have the best player. And Bowden, one of his things, they said all the time, he get asked, what's the key to your program? Well, I always figured if I had better players than you, I'd probably win, which is true. You get the best players and you can adapt to them with your scheme. So let me find the comment here. When you look at Florida State historically, obviously defense is well known anyway, but personnel packages, we're going to use different packages for individuals. I want to say that again. We're going to use different personnel packages for individuals. He went in depth, and I'm just sitting here scribbling as he's going through his press conference, and I recorded. I might add some more on tomorrow's pod, but Coach White impressed me with that because he's a very well-known coordinator based on what I've read, the statistics and all of that. And maybe tomorrow I'll go into more depth with Nebraska's defense over the last couple of years. But he impressed me with that because so many guys, especially the old school 3-3 defensive line or 3-3-5 or 3-4, they really don't want to change much. That's my experience with those coaches. Him openly admitting what he was going to do, because the question was pretty open-ended. Tony could have answered it any way he wanted. And he was just like, we're going to be multiple. That was his words. And he brought up another key point. He used Gus as an example. He goes, that guy's been coaching a long time. If you think you're going to come out and run the same defense over and over again for a whole game against today's offenses, you're wrong. Like, the expression on Coach White's face truly set the tone. He knew that it's a challenge against today's offenses unless you could really kind of confuse them and make them feel uncomfortable. If you're not trying in some capacity to confuse the offense in today's world, I completely agree, you're in trouble. And it's a little bit easier with the three-man line because you got more moving parts at the second level, meaning linebackers and safeties, depending on how you want to label them. And Coach White went into that a little bit too, but the personnel packages will differ, and they're just now getting into it. Malzahn mentioned this too. They're evaluating the current talent, and Coach White said, especially the back end, he said it like 3 or 4 times. He was really impressive I'm impressed with the defensive backs that the Noles have. He liked some of the size and athleticism of some of the players coming back up front. The linebackers he knew were younger. They're going to have to coach him up. I get the sense just by his body language, he knows they've got work to do there, but Florida State fans do that anyway. That's not a newsflash. Coach White's just being introduced to it. You got to remember that. He was in Nebraska this past season, but like Omar Graham's in the portal, etc. I expect Florida State, if they're going to spend some money, there's going to be a linebacker, whether it's a Nebraska player, maybe multiple that come from Nebraska, other places. They're going to need to hit linebacker. You could tell what he was saying. They got to coach some guys up, but they need some depth and more playmakers there too. It's not one or the other. It's both. So I was very happy with his honesty, his ability to be in really just somebody that's transformational. You can't just accept that the personnel you had at Nebraska is going to be pigeonholed into running that same scheme at Florida State because the players aren't the same. They weren't recruited for the same fit in the same scheme. So that's really important. Also, here are a couple other things that I really liked about it because he was asked, okay, why Florida State? Why would you come now? And he was A to B about it. This was also refreshing. Thank the Lord for somebody for being so honest here. Historical program, and it's been historical recently. And he went over and over and over again the following comment. The area around here to recruit. He brought up something that's also true about his three-man line and his fronts. It's historically difficult to recruit those. I've talked about that before too. You need bigger body types. Everybody wants them. There's only so many, and it's far, far, far lower than the number of players that there are to the need. Like there needs to be 100 of these guys a year. There's like 15 to 20 in the country that can come in and make an impact, that have the natural size, the natural length, the natural mentality, that have been coached, that can two-gap, all that kind of stuff. And that's also why he brought up having to change your defense to the players. They may run more of a one-gap three-man line this year, but they might adapt because they do have some bigger bodies at Florida State, like Denise White. Just as an example, as somebody, as he's redshirted this year, maybe next year he's ready to play some, and they run more of a zero tech. And he will adapt to that, but he knows he can get more of those players down south. Think about where Florida State has recruited historically. Florida, Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas, occasionally a kid from the Virginia Beach area or D.C., mixing one or two from Texas, maybe a California kid, and every now and again a Chicago player, Pittsburgh player, something like that. But it's pretty rare. Most of those kids are down south. Tony has done his research. He knows at Florida State it's easier to get the defensive players. You'd be amazed, truly amazed, how many coaches don't understand the difference between football in the South and other areas because it's such a cultural deal. It's a huge deal. There's a kid here locally where I live. It's going to Auburn. His dad didn't want him to play basketball anymore because he didn't want him to lose weight. He knew he was a future defensive lineman. He was right. The kid weighs 325 pounds now. He's going to go be an interior defensive lineman for Auburn. It's a different mentality down here. That's the kind of kids that you can recruit at Florida State within the 300-mile radius of Tallahassee. It's very, very important that he understands that. Let's talk about incorporating the personnel. I already brought it up anyway with the 3-3-5. This is so important. Players, incorporate all the talent and personnel that you have. He's run four-man fronts. For those of you that don't like the three-man line, you're going to see it, but he's going to run it in what I would consider four different ways, maybe five, depending on how you want to talk about it. You have a true three-man front. You'll have a stand-up guy on the edge. They call it a jack at Nebraska. And he said, he brought this up because somebody asked the question. The personnel, the names of the position could change. Like they called it the Tillman position, like the Rover at Arizona State, because, Pat Tillman's a famous player that died for our country in combat. But there could be, that's to me still a four-man line. The guy's standing up. Is he rushing the passer? It's still a four-man line. It's just where he's lined up and he's at a 2-point stand instead of 3. Who cares? That being said, you're going to see what they call a double eagle. It's something Georgia ran a few years ago against Bryce Young and Bama in the national title game. Both outside backers up on the line. And you'll also just see a flat-out four-man line at some point. And you'll probably see some different things with how they line up the four-man line, meaning there'll be some even fronts, two-man kind of situations where you're still two-gapping, or they'll play gaps and shoot one gap and go up. You're going to see all that based on what Florida State has year to year. I believe that with Kevin Wynn, Denise White, and some of these other guys they have in the younger players at Florida State, you're going to see Florida State be able to do more stuff right off the bat than what Coach White probably knew. That's the good news. That doesn't mean they don't need more players from the portal. They got Williams and different guys coming in on Monday this next week. Huge for Florida State to get them. But right now, I am very, very happy with Coach White. And one last thing on him. They asked him about practice. What do you want to do and all that? He says, basically, you play like you practice. You want to be physical? Well, you got to do it in practice. I think Florida State is going to hit more than most teams in practice. That is my feeling based on Tony's press conference. And that is huge for Florida State football, because if you don't do that and you're going to go beat Clemson or Miami, or like they got Notre Dame again coming, they got Alabama next year, you can't play against those teams without being a line of scrimmage football team. You have no chance. He knows that. You're going to practice it to see the results. Very, very impressed with Coach White. When we come back, we're going to talk about the press conference for Gus Malzahn, a few things that I even learned about a guy that I know. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL right there in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Florida State is also bringing in none other than Gus Malzahn to be its offensive coordinator. Now, Gus Malzahn is a guy that's been around a long time. I had the opportunity to cover him when he was at UCF. Great guy. I think he will fit in extremely well in Tallahassee. I think he's a personality that anybody can relate to. He's the person you want to sit down and have a cup of coffee with and just talk about life. That's the first thing I want to say about him before I even comment at all about Gus as a play caller or his philosophies. But with that being stated, I did learn a few things about him, and it's unique. He went into depth about how he got to know Norvell, and one of the statements that he made caught me a bit off guard, because Gus, while he's a great guy and he wants to see people be successful, Malzahn doesn't exactly just hand out compliments. You got to earn it. He is very old school. They mentioned that towards the end of the podcast or the press conference. One of the reporters in the room brought up, hey, I'm an old school guy. You brought up old school at least 3 times. And he talked about downhill, physical, and all those different things over and over. Well, just before that, he had also brought up how Mike is somebody that he'd met, was a GA for him at Tulsa. And he said, I'd never heard of it before, but Mike basically ended up being our wide receiver coach that year. And I was like, holy moly. He had enough trust in a young guy, and that's not Gus's style. I can tell you firsthand. It's not. He had enough trust in a young guy like Norvell at Tulsa to let him be the receivers coach. Maybe that is Norvell's calling. Maybe he should focus more on that, while Gus, he's going to be the play caller. He denoted that. He is going to call plays for the Noles. But to be honest with you, if Norvell transitions to that, and obviously Florida State needs help at receiver desperately, and they get a good receiver coach in conjunction with Mike, maybe they could turn that room around pretty quick. It would be great. Obviously, the portal will be important, and that's a podcast in the not so distant future. But FSU must hit a home run. Absolutely hit a home run with getting Norvell involved with that stuff, because I didn't know he was that good a receiver coach. I'm telling you, Gus Malzahn does not just hand out superlatives for free. Like, you've got to truly earn it. And he said, again, the guy was a GA at the time, and then he was moving up. So they've got a long history. And he also brought up something that I had no idea. This is so ironic. Their wording, their messaging, how they do things, and all the terminology is basically the same. I guess Norvell learned it from him. Maybe, I'm sure they've got some stems here or there, because they got some different play calls and different ideas and even concepts. But that will make it easier for Malzahn to come to Florida State. I had no idea, and that is huge. especially if with the transfer quarterback like Thomas Castellanos, who most of us expect to end up at Florida State, whomever it is, there won't be as big a gap. And Thomas, by the way, knows Gus anyway. That is humongous because if your quarterback knows what's going on in spring practice, he can not only help be adapted to the offense, he can help other guys they bring in quickly adapt. So the wording points from today's press conference for me were really good. The point about Mike is great history. That's very important. I'm glad Gus brought it up. And then all the terminology is huge too. As far as him overall, he's really impressed with Norvell, just the way he coaches and his energy. Gus is an up-tempo guy. He's a very high-energy guy. He's like somebody you would think, quite honestly, is always hopped up on caffeine. I don't even know if he drinks coffee, but he's got plenty of it. He obviously fits in with Norvell in that regard. Why OC? He didn't give a direct answer on this, and this is typical Gus, but he said the landscape of college football has changed dramatically in the last couple of years, and he's right. He said portal, NIL, agents, and collectives. I think Gus, being an old school guy, he's just done with it. He wants to coach football. He loves coaching football. He wants to call plays, and you'll deal with it some, but he wanted to pass that off. That's how I took it. I'd have to have a personal conversation with him to know for sure, but Gus is pretty much no holds bar, and I don't think that's a perfect fit for him. But he also said one other thing that was not surprising, but I do wanted to note this. He said the main reason he came was because of his relationship with Mike. They're good friends. That's good to know. As far as the quarterback that he's looking for, somebody that pushes the ball down the field, something I talked about recently when Malzahn was announced as Florida State's coach. He is going to be a vertical passing game guy, but he will mix in the screens. He makes it very difficult for defenses coming back. If they want to play cloud coverage, cover 3, that kind of stuff, cover 4, that's fine. He's going to run the ball downhill and screen you to death, hit occasional reverse or some kind of misdirection, and then they will use trick plays and or go balls to stress you vertically. That is his offense, and he made it very clear before anybody even asked. They will push the tempo. That was something I was hoping they would get asked, but he just went out and threw it. Boom, here it is. They want to play fast, play downhill. He thinks that everything, especially with pass protection, it's a lot easier for the O-lineman and the quarterback if you can run the ball downhill, and he's right. Everybody committing inside, taking inside steps, not as many pass rushers, trying to shoot around the ends for the offensive tackles and the tight ends. That is true. So I was glad to see that he really hasn't changed anything. He's going to be who he is. He's going to stay in his own personal comfort zone. And he brought up, the talent that you can recruit to Florida State, and even talked about Javon Boggs. That was really important to him. He knew that they could get really good players to Tallahassee. Usman Chroma, he brought up something that I'd forgotten. When he was at Auburn and they won the title in 10, they had a freshman that was the MVP of that game, and he was a really good running back. He said, there's no reason Chroma can't be an impact on this team. Gus understands that running back is very, very important in his offense, and he's going to give everybody a shot. Chroma is obviously a special player. If you haven't seen him, I'm telling you, it is worth your time to go look up Usman Chroma's film. And to spell it, it's Ousmane. Chroma is Kromah. Really good football player. Catching the ball, blocking, running, especially breaking tackles. He's one of those guys that has a rare density to his body in the way he can absorb a hit, and it's almost like it propels him. Really good football player. He's high on him. Javon Boggs, somebody else I mentioned, kid out of Cocoa. Really good player. He said he was a priority at UCF. He's a priority at Florida State. He's very happy to get him up to Tallahassee. That's a guy that's what I would call an impact possession receiver. Now, what's that mean? Remember Green that played at Florida State? He had speed, but he had just a knack of catching the football in space and making a play, making a guy miss. Always got extra yards, right? Well, when he was contested catch situations, he just came, it wasn't 50-50 ball. It was like 85-15. Well, that's a similar deal with Boggs. He's not going to go run 4.3, but he's fast enough, and he has a really good first step. That might be a kid that plays early at Florida State. Who knows? I can tell you this. He's got insane hands. At the Under Armour event this past spring in Florida, he had a one-handed catch. It was the best catch of the day. I remember getting that on video, and I'm like, that's just utterly ridiculous. If you need to get those kind of guys to Florida State, You got to go recruit him, and Florida State pulled a coup to get him flipped from UCF there at the end. That was important, and Gus was happy to talk about it. Last thing about him, he's talking about the next 2 weeks. This could not be stated any better. It is vital for Florida State to find needs in the transfer portal to help alleviate holes on the offense. There's no question about it. Florida State has needs, and that's something we're going to talk about here in just a second on Locked On Seminoles. He said the next 2 weeks. So let's see what happens with that. And I'm going to give my own thoughts, including the quarterback position, on those needs next here on Locked On Seminoles. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. Guaranteed perfection in every single bite. And right now, you can have the unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. 5 generations of experience consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks, desserts, and more, save 50% off site-wide on a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchases may apply. Can we talk some quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, and O-line? I'm sure all of you have discussed it at some point with your friends if you're Florida State fans, and Lord only knows the Noles need it. I have adjusted a little bit with what I think Florida State's going to do, and I've also got a little bit of insight on at least one of the players. Let's start with the offensive line just because it's fresh on my mind right now. And Herb Hand, somebody I've mentioned, he was recently hired. He's worked with Gus. This will be the 4th place. Tulsa, obviously worked with Mike there too. He's worked at Auburn. He's worked at UCF, and now it will be Florida State. So that's 4. He's a tremendous offensive line coach. Caden Kittler, a kid that UCF recruited out of the Dallas area, really good football player, was the center for UCF. He's going to visit FSU. I think that's a player now that he's got a year of experience. He's going to be a redshirt junior this next fall. He could be a 2-year starter for you at center. It's perfect. That would be a huge addition. I think, as I've stated numerous times, they need at least 4 O-linemen in this portal class. Kittler would be a great start. Now, they've got other guys that they're going to talk about and they could possibly get. There's Patrick Kutas, the offensive guard, who's originally out of the Memphis area. Mike probably knows him. He's a kid that's a really good football player, started at Arkansas. He's in the portal. Derek Simmons is going to visit. He's 325 pounds. He played at Western Carolina. He's an offensive lineman that can play guard or tackle. I think they hope he can play tackle. He's going to visit one of the higher rated guys. So if you can get, say, 2 out of those 3, and it sounds like, to me, I haven't heard anything other. Jalen Early's going to stick around. Andre Otto, Lucas Simmons. If they can get some development, the O-line could be a little bit better than I thought. But getting Hand is huge because Kittler, there's another one of the offensive linemen I don't know as much about from UCF that's going to visit. They could wrap it up a little quicker than I thought. Now, I'm not saying they won't need the spring portal to finish O-line recruiting. They probably will. But 4 is the minimum number. The way Gus talked about it, I think 6 is the more realistic number because they might take a developmental guy from another program. Don't look at it as the total number for offensive linemen just in the sense of, okay, we need 6 impact guys. That's not realistic. Let me talk about that for a second. I forget what the kid's name is, but the offensive tackle from Virginia Tech, somebody mentioned he's arguably the best tackle in the portal. Okay. I don't know a lot about Virginia Tech. I don't really watch them much, but they were saying over $1 million a year because he can play left. Look, Florida State's not in a position to pay that. They need numbers, and they're not a national title team next year. They're not going to go after that kid, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I highly doubt that's going to be their path. Secondarily, the numbers part, you've got to be able to spread some of that money to develop your kids. Gus talked about it a little bit during the press conference. You want to do mostly through the high school, then the portal fills in holes. 100% agree. Well, Florida State, he also admitted, is not in that position right now because the season they're coming off of, they had several guys that were done eligibility-wise after this season. And a few guys are in the portal or maybe. I'm not sure if he was hinting or not. I really couldn't tell. But It wouldn't surprise me if one or two more guys that are underclassmen left Florida State. That's just part of the deal. If Florida State is going to be successful, they got to spread some of that out. We'll see how it goes. But let's look at it this way. If they take 6 O-linemen, 4 of them, I think, need to be able to at least compete for a starting position this next fall. 1, perhaps 2, or like redshirt freshmen, they redshirted this year and picked a school, and they're coming to Florida State, or they're going to be a redshirt sophomore, and they played a little bit. Played at Memphis, played at Purdue, played at USC, whatever. Have at least a little experience in some capacity in college football, but maybe not a lot of actual snaps in live competition. So I think they'll end up with 6. Originally, I thought 4 would be a possible number, but if looking at it more, I was wrong. I think 6 it's not out of the question, 7, because it depends on how many developmental guys you want to take. So take it for what it's worth. Next, quarterback. Florida State is hosting Thomas Castellanos. That's probably where Gus Malzahn, as I do this podcast, is right now, is with Thomas. I expect him to commit to Florida State in short order. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I can tell you right now, Florida State is in a scenario where they need at least 1 and probably 2 quarterbacks. It sounds like Brock Glenn's going to stick around. I don't know. But if he does, so be it. That would be good to have some stability. He is a mobile quarterback that can run Gus's offense. But they also need to have another experienced guy. That way, that Sperry doesn't have to come in and worry about playing. His red shirts, learns the system, and moves along. And by the way, he's a very good fit for what Gus does. I think that Florida State needs 2. Castellanos is 1. Can they find a guy from the MAC or from some of the other conferences that maybe a guy wants to have the chance to at least be on a team that's at the Power 4? That's my guess because, again, money's part of this. Let's not kid ourselves. And secondarily, you're not going to get lucky to get like Caden Salter and Thomas Castellanos. It's not going to happen. I know some people talk, well, no, that's not realistic. A, it's the money, and B, they both want to start. It's not very realistic. Let's move to running back. Because of getting Chroma, Florida State probably doesn't necessarily need a running back, but I could see them taking a fullback, H-back type because Gus does that quite a bit. There's a kid from UCF, Pittman, who originally committed to the Noles and is from Panama City. That could be a possibility. He's in the portal. They also probably need an inline blocking tight end. You can always move them to the backfield too. They're not traditional running backs, but that's a way to look at it. The only other way I see them taking a running back in the portal, the more I look at it, is if it's a special player in the sense of true speed and being able to play in the slot some, especially if it's a younger guy. Remember, Jalen Lucas was injured this past season. He's that guy right now, but we don't know what his situation is. He had a season-ending injury pretty early in the season. Hopefully he's good to go, but Gus really likes speed. He likes running reverses and screens a lot. I'm telling you, Jalen Lucas is a great example of somebody he could use. That might be a situation where Florida State looks at one of those guys that's a dual threat as a running back and maybe another position like slot as well. Receiver. This hasn't changed at all. My thoughts on it are still the same. They need 3. One of them needs to be a really good guy. You hope you can get a number 1, but how much money you're going to spend on that? Are they going to go get somebody that's going to get $1 million or more dollars? I doubt that. $500,000 guy? Possibly. Let's go over a couple points here. There's 2 receivers in Miami of Ohio, one of which averaged 19.9 yards a catch. Somebody like that's good because he's a 6'4" guy that can run. If you're 6'4" and you average over 19 yards a catch, I do not care what league you are in. That's good. And Norvell really does covet bigger receivers, but he does need to find a few more shifty guys. Javon Boggs helps. They got a big kid out of the transfer portal that's transferring, out of the junior college ranks that's transferring in. That's good. But you need another shifty guy that's got some experience. Again, Lucas is not healthy, and you lost Shakai Douglas. His eligibility is up. I would have loved to have seen him in Malzahn's offense. But Florida State is not in a great scenario right now, in my opinion, when it comes to the slot, because Destin Hill is transferred. I haven't talked about that on this show. I wanted to see if that would stick, but he has left the program. Who's going to be your key slot? Are they going to move somebody like Hakeem inside? Maybe Jaylen Brown moves inside. He's got the speed that Gus loves. I'm sure he's going to try to work with him. But you need to figure that slot position out. So 3, I'd love to see a number 1, at least somebody kind of close to it. But let's see what happens with that. And some versatility with a guy that can make you miss. It's really athletic that can play slot. Finally, let's talk about tight end. this is a position where it is unique. As I mentioned with the running back, it depends on how you want to label it. Like Pittman could play running back. He's athletic, but he's 6'1", 6'2", catches the football well and can be a lead blocker. And as Gus likes to call it, play him in the hip at the tackle or the tight end. A lot of 12 personnel with them. I think they're going to be similar, but it depends on how the portal works out at receiver. So do they need another inline blocking tight end? Yes, they do. That's one. If you want to count Pittman as an H-back / tight end, that's fine. You want to count him as a running back, that's fine. Or somebody similar, that's your own business. I don't really care. It's a little both. Pittman's so athletic. He's just a football player. He could play linebacker for you, running back, tight end, whatever. But I also think Florida State has to remember Amari and Landon. That is a really special combination. They just need to be able to use them out wide as much as possible to put safeties and linebackers in really bad spots. And even if you play them all the way out wide, do they move a linebacker out that far from the line of scrimmage? And the football itself at the snap, not many guys are going to run with Landon Thomas detached that far from the tackle. Florida State could use a big tight end just to help block, to allow the play to develop, and the quarterback to throw a deep ball to your deep players. They're tight ends. Amari and Landon are very unique. So Florida State's offense could evolve a little bit, and that's something Norvell talked about. Over time, you got to get your players in position to make plays to help maximize. He said that numerous times during his tenure at Florida State. And Norvell is not stupid. He knows Gus is going to do that too. And I've covered Gus enough to know that he's that way. When he had a kid that got hot, he'd feed him. So if Landon gets hot, he might put him out wide. He might put him in the backfield, do different things. And if it's Jaylen Brown, same deal. They'll move guys around. So the portal just needs to be supplemented. You got to have more guys up front. That's the key. The tight end and O-line position, the blocking and how they use formations will be key. I'm curious to see who they go after for the inline tight end. They've always had a power blocker. When he was at Auburn, when he was at UCF, there was a good run blocker, but they could really beat you in the goal line in short yardage too. So that's a possibility. With that being stated, thank you very much for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. If you have not already, please hit the like button, that notification bell, and above all else, subscribe. I truly appreciate it. And if at all possible, I'd love you to share this podcast so I can get in front of more Florida State fans. It's been a lot of fun covering it here recently. We got a whole bunch more news, I think, is coming in the very near future. So keep it locked right here to Locked On Seminoles and have some fun. Last thing, if you want to keep up with the news, all the things on the portal, FB Scout _Florida. That's FB Scout _Florida on X. There is a lot of news that I'm commenting on. Portal players like Mississippi State quarterback, they just lost him. That's terrible for their program. You can check that out because there's plenty of Florida State stuff too. Everybody have a good one, and I will see you again tomorrow.